Hi, so I'm Shirley, and I'll be talking about the research we did on citizen-friendly communication about drought. So our research project is called Citizen-Friendly Data Communication, where the goal is to look at how open government data can be communicated better to citizens. And we define citizen-friendly data communication as data that's supplied in a way that citizens can access it and understand it, and subsequently use it to hold public officials accountable and or participate in public decision making. So that's how it fits in the theme of using data visualization for policy making. Today, we're going to be discussing two studies that we did about citizen-friendly data communication. Lisanne will talk about a survey that we did. I'll talk about a field lab that we did, and then Lisanne will wrap up with some do's and don'ts. But a first important tenet to begin with before we jump into our research findings is that no one size fits all. And so what do we mean by this? We mean there is no average data set, and also there's no average citizen. We see governments try to sometimes communicate about data to citizens, but both of these concepts don't really exist as an average. First of all, for data, all data is different, and as such, it requires different communication strategies. So communicating about drought is going to be very different or require a different strategy than communicating about, for instance, finance or financial data. And secondly, all citizens are also different. Citizens have different characteristics and different preferences, and that affects their abilities to understand data communication. So with our research, we try to unpack this a little bit more, and Lisanne will tell you a little bit about our survey.
Yes, so in our first study, we try to find out how citizens experience and interpret data visualizations as compared to text or raw data. The table with raw data sort of represents an objective list of data. And in trying to answer this question, we were particularly interested in personal skills. And here you can think of literacy, numeracy, digital literacy. But for this first study, we were mainly interested in visual literacy. Visual literacy refers specifically to people's ability to interpret, use, and critically assess and create data visualizations. Visual literacy increases as a result of experience viewing and creating these types of visualizations. And in our study, we wanted to see if citizens who have a higher degree of visual literacy prefer data visualizations over other modes of communication, and also understand visualizations with more ease as compared to citizens with lower visual literacy. Through centered data in Tilburg, we managed to reach 2,000 Dutch citizens in which society was nicely reflected. And our study had the following design. So there were two predictors mode. Every participant saw one of the three different modes of communication. So data visualization, textual summary, or a table. And the other predictor was visual literacy. So we asked participants questions that measured self-reported visual literacy. And there were two outcome variables or dependent variables: experience with the data. We asked questions that refer to usability, attractiveness, ease, and credibility of the data. And the other dependent variable was information transfer. We asked questions that tested how well participants extracted information from what they saw. Let's go to the materials that we used in this study. So the data that we used came from the Dutch Water Authority. It's the same authority that we performed the field lab at, which Shirley will talk about in a minute. Now, the Water Authority has been experimenting with open data and made these data available through an open data portal. And the data consisted of groundwater levels from several measuring points that were indicated by latitude and longitude, as you can see here in the table. And an information designer at Deloitte, which is part of our consortium, created this visualization for us. And the visualization was the input for the textual summary that you can see here. Let's go to the results of this study. We had very interesting findings. First, experience with the data. Participants who are more visually literate reported a better experience with the data. And we also found that both visual and textual summaries resulted in a better experience as compared to the same information at the table. Now, interestingly, specifically for participants with high visual literacy, as you can see here with the pink line, they had a better experience with the data visualization as compared to the table. And this wasn't the case for the people who had low visual literacy. Now let's go to information transfer. We found in general that information transfer was more accurate for participants who report more visual literacy. And we also found that only a textual summary resulted in better information transfer. Now, if we recreate the same visualization as we had for experience of the data, then we can see very clearly that there's no difference in the information transfer of a table or a data visualization. So what does this tell us? The purpose of the open data communication matters, as data visualizations yield a better experience, but textual summaries yield a better information transfer. So these findings imply that governments communicating data should choose their method depending on the purpose that they have with the communication. Now let's go to the field study, Shirley.
Thanks, Lisanne. So the other research that we did is a field lab that we also performed at that same water authority, Waterschap A en Maas, pictured here. And so a field lab is an experimental research method borrowed from design sciences. And for it, a group of experts is actually brought together to create an innovation. And in our case, the innovation would be a citizen-friendly data communication, data visualization about drought. So who was participating? We had employees from the water agency. We had the researchers from our research team. We invited citizens. And finally, we also invited data visualization experts. And so we all came together and discussed things like what is drought and how do you experience how it's currently visualized, or what would you like to see? And the end goal is to create a visualization. I'd love to share that with you now, but we don't have it yet for reasons that I'll go into in a little bit. But so we had quite similar findings to the survey. So the three key takeaways: keep it simple, text is valuable, and do more than describe. So first of all, keep it simple. As said, the average citizen does not exist. But in order to reach as wide range of citizens as possible, it is still best to keep it simple if you're only going to be communicating in one format. One of the citizens even said, well, maybe you should use Jip and Janneke language or children's language, because that's, vocabulary that everybody can understand, because not everyone is an expert when it comes to drought and a lot of the more meteorological terms. But you do have to be careful with this, because sometimes when governments communicate in an overly simplified way, this can come across as very patronizing or talking down to citizens. So don't oversimplify things either, as if you're talking to 5-year-olds about everything. Secondly, text is still very valuable. This might be counterintuitive at a data viz conference, but especially text can be valuable in explaining these visuals, and not just showing a visual to a group of citizens, but really explaining what citizens should be seeing in this visual, taking them by the hand, drawing attention to specific elements, explaining how you as a government would interpret this visual. That can help them either agree with that interpretation or disagree. And finally, do more than just describe. As said, the data that the water agency was sharing now was groundwater levels, and citizens weren't really interested in just that. They wanted to know more than just describing what these ground level waters were. They were interested in why are they this high or this low in certain areas, where do the differences come from? And so they wanted links to different data sets to bring the data together in a bigger story. Now that's also the problem that we ran into with our field lab, because it is very very difficult to connect to these databases. So that's something that governments need to be very mindful of. But Lisanne will say a bit more about this when she goes into the do's and don'ts.
Yes. Okay. So what have we learned from the two studies? Let's list some don'ts and do's. The first one is don't fence fling. Don't throw data over the fence and assume that every citizen will know what to do with it. So communicating a data set with objective info is only interesting for a small group of citizens. So for the rest of the citizens, for all other citizens, we need to tell a story. But telling a story with the right means is only possible if you know what the purpose of the data communication is. And if you know what the purpose of the data communication is, then you know what the perspective of that particular representation should be. So textual summary is often best for information transfer, and visualization might make the citizen feel good, which is also very important for a good relationship between the citizen and the government. The second point is do not only focus on sending the data or just meeting the requirement of making the data available. Engage in a dialogue with the citizen. What the citizen wants to know is not necessarily what the government wants to tell them. So really start a dialogue to find out where the two meet. The third one is do not assume that there is an average citizen, but try to get to know your citizens, and that is really plural. So try to find out who visits your website, what pages particular people are viewing, what the skills and interest of those citizens are, and focus on particular target groups instead of focusing on the average citizen. So what is the bottom line? What is our key message? Communicate with citizens, not to citizens. So to engage citizens, you really need to engage with them. Don't just send them information or create data visualizations and let the process stop there. By engaging with citizens, you learn what their wishes are, and you actually give the citizens a voice. And together, this leads to good policy making, and that is very important, of course, and the bottom line of what we're trying to discuss here. So if you're interested to learn more about our project, please go to our website, citizen-friendly-data-communication.nl. And here there's also our email and Twitter accounts. Thank you so much.